This is Duke University.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So we really appreciate your participation tonight and for being here for what we know is going to be an amazing Duke event. And we know it has been a really challenging few weeks here, and those of us in Durham and on campus and have been thinking about members of our Duke family up in the Northeast. And so we, of course, wishing you all the best. Even before Sandy and the last few weeks, this would have been a great Duke evening. But under these circumstances, we're especially pleased to be able to bring you a timely educational and topical program, which is one of the key goals of the Alumni Association. And so one of the things that makes tonight's program so unique is the concept for this idea was completely generated from the Duke New York Volunteer Board. And as you may know, we are in year 2 of a transitional model for Duke activities in New York, where the local board is comprised of representatives from all of Duke's interests in New York, including many, if not most, of the schools and units. And this group wanted to plan something unique for New York area Duke alums, and the idea of focusing on the city and tapping our own Duke expertise to do something about that. And so they're very excited that we have Bob Steele, of course, who is who else would be better to talk about New York and the area, and of course is one of our own. And this is just hopefully the first, the model for the kind of programming that we're going to be having in the region and going forward. And just so you know, New York is one of 9 regions where we have developed these regional boards, and we are exploring this kind of programming and working on this kind of rich content in our larger cities around the country. I also want to say a special thanks to our alums who volunteered in Staten Island this past weekend. It was a great opportunity for over 100 alums to go to Staten Island to help make a difference with some people who really were in need. And I know that a lot of people who were there and volunteering were really glad that Duke had provided this opportunity because they wanted a tangible way to reach out and make a difference. And so thanks to those who helped organize that. There are several, well, we have a lot of special guests here tonight. We're all special guests, but I want to recognize a few. I want to recognize a few trustees who are here. If they could raise their hands. Martha Montserrat, you can stand up too, that'd be great. Ken Hubbard, stand up. Roy Bostock. Where is he? Roy, there. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we also have a couple of alumni board members who are here as well. Ed Howard. Jack Boyd, and is Katie Laidlaw here? Did she come in? Well, she'll come in here. She'll be in a few minutes. So now it is my pleasure to turn over the program to our moderator and our speaker, Bob Steele, class of '73. And I know that you saw his bio and information on the invitation and the web, but as you know, he is a deputy mayor for economic development for the city of New York. Bob has done so many things in his career, and his bio is typically modest because that is the person that he is, but he has had an extraordinary career and done so much and given so much to so many organizations. And I want to talk a little bit about his Duke leadership. As you know, he was chairman of the Duke Board of Trustees. He chaired the committee that brought us Dick Broadhead. He has hosted events. He has led fundraising efforts. He has chaired and been part of his reunions. He really has done everything that Duke has ever asked, which is pretty amazing, in addition to having a very full life and career. And so I want to have him come forward in a few minutes. And as he told some of his folks with him, I have happened to had the pleasure of knowing Bob all my life. So he and my brother were roommates. So if you ever need any information, if there's anything you want to know, just let me know. And I did notice on your CV, Bob, it does not talk about the fact that you used to babysit me sometimes. So I'll turn the program over to Bob.
Well, Sterling, thanks for that. It's terrific for me to be here to really try to set up and then be part of a panel and a discussion about things going on in New York City. And hopefully it'll be informative. I thought what I might do would be talk and try to frame things of going on in New York and then talk for just a few minutes about my job and what I think about all day. And then we'll have an esteemed group come up who know so many different things about New York City, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion among us for a few minutes, and then at some point, not too long into it, we'll open it up and ask you for things you'd like to speak about. It's a bit odd, I think, because I, a few weeks ago, know exactly how you'd kind of organize this. But I think given the storm and the hurricane and the effect on people, it really takes a bit of adjustment. So what I thought I would do would be maybe speak for a few minutes as if what I would have talked about originally, and then maybe try to frame what's happened with the storm and the aftermath. And then I think that we'll weave that into the conversation when we all kind of go up on the stage together, if that makes sense. And so hopefully then we'll get some information that we might have done otherwise, but we also need to be respectful to the situation, what's happened. So I went to work for Mayor Bloomberg about 2 years ago, and the way the city works is, there are a couple of facts. There are about 8.3 million people, and the city is really run through about 80 agencies and commissions, and they're the really ones that run the city. And so some of these are really big, like education or fire or police, and others are smaller that have more specific responsibility. And all of these are run by a mayoral appointee who is the head of these commissions. And the way the Mayor Bloomberg has organized things is he has a handful of us that have the title deputy mayor, and we're each responsible for maybe 15 of these different agencies. So I'm kind of like a division head, and my lane is economic development. And there's another deputy mayor who's health and human services, and another deputy mayor who's operations, and another deputy mayor who takes care of public affairs, government affairs, and things like that. So that's the way it works. And so the mayor can't be in contact constantly with 80 commissioners. So our job is to be the filter. And my job really is economic development. And so my responsibility really is about how does the economy grow? How do we make New York to be a place that people want to be and that really has the pistons pumping so that we can be producing jobs and high unemployment. And I think the shorthand is that New York's doing pretty well, especially compared to other cities, that the mayor has had a good ambition of diversifying the economy and moving away from finance and insurance and real estate into other types of parts of the economy. And he's also pushed hard to make sure that other things go well too. And for my job, I think about the four kind of planks or foundations of how I think about it and what makes us successful from economic development. And I could talk about any one of these four for a long time, but let me just try to roll through them, and I think they'll help frame some of the other things we talk about tonight. The number one thing we need, I think, for New York to be successful from an economic development perspective, and one of the key foundations is what I use the catchphrase quality of life. New York needs to be a place where people think they can live and have a high quality of life. And this is really a broad describer. And what I mean by this is that people think it needs to be safe. We need clean water, clean air, parks, art, cultural institutions, and good schools for our children. All these things go into building quality of life. And I think that the mayor has done a good job on this in the first 10 years of his administration. And I think, let me just give one or two examples. The best one really, I think, is public safety. 20 years ago in New York City, there were about 2,500 murders a year. And then Mayor Giuliani and Police Commissioner Bratton took this on. And this year, there'll be less than 500. Now, think of a knotty public policy issue like that, and imagine where could you get 80% improvement in 20 years. And I think the fact that this has really done all kinds of things. You can live in places of the city that you couldn't have lived in 20 years ago. I have friends, and we all know people that live all over Brooklyn and Williamsburg and places like that would have been, I live in NoHo, these would have been no-go places 20 years ago. And it really is a function of the public safety that have really changed the complexion. Also, too, this mayor has been interested in parks, and we'll come back to this, but we're a big believer and continue to be with waterfront parks, and we have one of our experts here. New York has 520 miles of coastline in New York City, and it's really an asset for the city that we want to make sure it's clean and works in all kinds of ways. I think the second fundamental foundational idea of things we talk about for the city is really the idea that we want to be business friendly. And one of my colleagues who's going to speak tonight really is focused on that. And what we mean by that is you want regulation that works. And that regulation has to be the right thumb on the scale. We want to eat in restaurants that are inspected and safe. We want to drive in a way that's safe. And we want to have regulation do the right things. But it's very easy for government to basically become a bit overly intensive with regard to regulation, because when you put a new regulation on, you almost never take an old regulation off. And so they pile on top of each other so that it really is a friction for business that can be quite cumbersome and expensive. I'll give you an example, because I don't think we think in government as if the citizens are customers. We tend to sometimes organize on behalf of what's easy for government as opposed to the citizens. Here's one example. We have 300 permits, licenses, and certificates that the City of New York gives. 300. Of those 300 certificates, 10% are available online. The rest of them, you show up at a place that's downtown and convenient for the people that work there. You show up between 10 and 4, but not between 12 and 1. And basically, you bring a blue ballpoint pen and engage with the city in a way that's convenient for the city, not for you. That has to change. If you have a small business in an outer borough and you have to come to get a permit downtown close to City Hall and lock the door of your business and forego the revenue to come do that, that's not the way we should be organized. So trying to cut at that is really a big issue. The third kind of foundational aspect is the idea of making the right investments in infrastructure. And this really is the purview of the executive branch. I don't think that you can count on the legislative branch to come up with 20-year ideas that will basically be long-term spending. No one on the City Council is saying, please count on me for the third water tunnel that'll take 20 years and cost $5 billion. Everyone wants something with a more immediate reaction, and it's the administration's responsibility to really push for the long-term investments that we need for the city. And so that's really a mayoral priority, and Mayor Bloomberg is constantly saying to us, what are the things we need to be doing to make the city more competitive for the long term? The last one really is kind of economic transformation innovation, and really the mayor has tried hard to be a leader in this area. New York's changing, and we have to be competitive with new industries and new types of things that draw people here. When I was growing up and you were choosing where to go, you went to New York or Chicago or Los Angeles. If you were a bit on the edge, you'd go to maybe Boston or Atlanta. And today, young people are finding really interesting jobs that they can do, and because of the connectivity of the world, our competition isn't just those places. Our competition, in my view, is Portland, Seattle, Austin, and Boulder, and places like that. So we have to have a community that's got and attracting those kinds of people. The mayor's fond of saying that people attract talent attracts capital. Capital doesn't attract talent. And so we want people to want to be here and to think about that. Our signature initiative in this whole area has been something that the mayor's led, which was an applied science initiative. If you look at New York City, we're underweight in engineers dramatically. That other places have many more engineers and people that are focused on applied sciences. And you could have all kinds of measures. And the mayor had the idea that we needed to have a campaign to try to change that. And so his idea was to run a contest where we provided capital, land, and advice and invited people to apply. And we have 3 winners so far. One was Cornell and the Technion, which will be building on Roosevelt Island. We have a new school, which will be in Brooklyn, which Polytech NYU's engineering school is going to be starting. And also Columbia is expanding what they're doing. And so the net result is that in 10 years, there'll be twice as many engineer graduates in New York City as there would have been had we not done this intervention. And when you look at the jobs, there are really 3 types. You build jobs to build the campuses. You have jobs to run the campuses. And then you have the jobs that come out of people creating companies that will come out of these ideas. So the idea is, how do you innovate and make the economy be forward-looking and continuing to diversify? So those are 4 of the planks on that. Let me make a abrupt pivot, and then we'll get everyone up. A couple of weeks ago, this storm was approaching, and we'd had a bit of a dry run with Irene a little more than a year ago, and I think that all the people told us this was going to be quite a big deal. Damage comes from 3 things: rain, wind, and surge, and I think most of us who don't live right on the water think about rain and wind. Either you lose a tree, or you have flooding in your basement, or something like that, but the real havoc wreaker in this storm was surge, where normally you might have 4 or 5 feet with a storm or a nor'easter, and this ended up being close to 12 or 14 feet. And as a result, you had water higher than we'd ever imagined. And we have what Zone A is in the city, and we describe it. And Zone A is the area that would be flooded in this type of situation. And it has about 300,000 people live in Zone A. And so you have to make a series of decisions. And the timing is, there's like a tick-tock here where you know the storm is going to hit on Monday afternoon. You have to decide to start if you'd want to, you have to start evacuating hospitals and nursing homes in Zone A about a day and a half to 2 days in advance. So we're starting to make pretty big decisions 2 days before the storm, it's someplace in the Caribbean, and we're starting to make decisions about, do you want to move people in hospitals, which is a big deal. These people are not well, that's why they're in hospitals, and when you move these people to some place that isn't accustomed to them and getting their charts with them and all the medicine and everything in a smooth way, it's a big deal. And so you kind of begin making decisions that way, and so that's really how it unfolded. I think, too, that, and then we'll get started with the panel, the Zone A has two characteristics that might not be obvious to all of us. Number one, almost all the commerce in these communities is small businesses, little shops. This is not big stores and shopping malls. These areas in South Staten Island, and I was today in Rocklands, Fort Rockaways, Coney Island, these types of places. These are small communities with small businesses. That's number one. And that when a small business gets knocked out, they don't have, getting back on their feet is a lot tougher than it is. There was a Gap that's located in the South Street Seaport, and they've got hundreds and hundreds of Gaps. This is just one, and they'll figure out a way to get it restarted, and they'll send in a crew. I was at the Fairway in Red Hook, and they've got the guys from the other Fairways. They're expert, and in 2 months they'll be back as good as new, and they've got a diversified business where this is not all their eggs in one basket. But if I have a small coffee shop or a restaurant or a retail store and I'm wiped out, then that's all there is. So small businesses is one characteristic. And the second characteristic is that this group is, this Zone A is about 3 to 4 times as overweight in people who live in public housing than the average. So there's a large component of people that count on assistance in all kinds of ways. So I think that was a big challenge for us to figure out too. And people don't like to evacuate. They like being where they are. They're scared if they leave, where will they go? Will their house be robbed? And so we're not very successful as you'd wish to be. I would guess you get probably, as hard as we try, we get probably 40 to 50% of the people to evacuate when we declare an evacuation. So we decided to move 48 hours in advance to close down the hospitals and the nursing homes and evacuate them. Then we did a voluntary evacuation to get people to move, and then the storm came, and then we've kind of worked through that. I think these things are interesting, and we'll talk about them on the panel. Why don't you all guys go sit down, and please come up, and then we'll get started, I think, that way, which will be terrific. Go ahead.
Do you have any format?
No, I think you can sit wherever you wish. I'll sit on the end. How's that? Wherever. They all have fancy mics. I don't. So I'll do this. I think that maybe we'll start with some questions or points, and invite people to offer some observations. I think Wari is responsible for really a waterfront park that's right at the pinnacle or the peak of Manhattan. I assume everyone's read the bios. We're not going to go through those. But at Battery Park. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what you expected, what happened, and how you're going to kind of come back from this and things like that?
The Battery, there was a master plan back in the 80s. And we were always very conscious. I created this organization about 18 years ago. And location was always ultimate in our planning and in our design. This is not news to us. We have plenty of research and understanding to exactly what happened these last couple of weeks. So in our planning for tidal surges, for change, we've been very much, we think, understanding the pros and cons. We wanted a fabulous place. This is where the city began. This is our birthplace park. We also knew that the waterfronts, I was on Ruth Messenger's task force on waterfront development way back when we knew that was our new public open space. So we have to solve these issues about how we live in concert with nature. So when we decided we wanted to be a horticultural oasis, we went to the Netherlands. Pete Aldoff, we brought him to New York. The salt tolerancy. I've been on the phone with him a couple of times just going over. We've been consulting with New Orleans Horts on every remuneration that worked post-Katrina. And we're doing the same things. Clean out the salt burned refuge, flush with fresh water, bring in new topsoil. So the sense that we built knowing we had to have salt-tolerant plants, number one. The other is that greeting the waterfront. When the water and the landscape mixes, it's what people are drawn to these waterfront areas. So understanding that landscape to seascape. And what? Sure, we prepared. We had the sandbags. We did all of that. And we have water in one of our vaults from our wonderful fountain. But the sense that we're learning, nothing structurally was destroyed. It's incredible. As you go, you know we were the surge. Every news channel was down on our waterfront. So the sense that it survived. The waterfront didn't fall apart. The gardens didn't roll up and blow away. We lost 3 mature trees, and when we cut them up, we showed parks, the arborists, look, the whole center was dying. So we've got to be real smart about, even though we're planting our 1,000,000 trees, and I'm all for, our plan. So, but initially, we've always had the environment as a key factor in planning and designing. And I think that served us well as we built well and now are certainly recovering, but it's not decimated.
Let me change to away from the storm. As I said, one of the issues that in the city we talk about, my second point was being open for business and thinking about business, that my colleague Tecumbo Shibawala is really taking a project to think about how to make it easier for business to work with us in the city so that small businesses can get open more easily, because when a business is trying to get open, every day they're not open, they basically are generating expenses without revenue. So if you can compress the time to get open, then you can encourage that more business to go. So Tecumbo, why don't you talk for a bit about what you've been working on?
Right, sure, thank you. So as Bob said, it's perhaps a bit different in the government because it's a natural monopoly. So unlike a lot of the businesses that you're in, where if you don't serve your customer well, they go to somebody else. And in the government, you don't really have that option. I mean, I think if we're honest about this, if they do have another option, is that businesses simply don't open, or they might open another location. So it's really, we don't have that competitive pressure that many businesses face to fight for customers. And so we have to have a self-imposed discipline to make ourselves customer friendly. And this is something the mayor has had from the beginning, because as you all know, he's a businessman. So he came from a mentality where he had to fight for every business, for every customer he had, and instill that. And part of the job that he and Bob asked me to do is to really make that sensibility permanent within the government, because obviously we have a limited amount of time. As he and Bob like to say, we're sort of sprinting towards the finish. We want to make sure that we build systems that endure and that businesses can count on stability that lasts indefinitely. And so it's really about, as Bob said, treating businesses as customers, because really it is the businesses that pay our taxes, pay for all of our city employees, and actually are the lifeblood of the city. And so it's all the things, and Bob sort of gave the example of the online applications, or the lack of online applications. If you think about every other aspect of your life, whether it be banking or airfare, purchasing airline tickets, tracking your packages via FedEx, everything else we're able to do online. So you can bank in your pajamas at 11 o'clock at night. You can purchase your tickets. You can check in. All these things we sort of assume as a given the competitive pressures in each of the industries, that there's a certain level of service that's provided. And so it's kind of taking that mentality of all the things you would expect from private sector businesses and applying that to the government. And it's particularly important, as Bob said, for small businesses, because if you're a large bank like this, or American Express, or Travelers, you can have a whole staff of people who are regulatory compliance, whose job is to figure out the government and deal with it. If you're a small business of 3 or 4 people, the chief compliance officer is the business owner. So she's the one who has to, as Bob said, if you have to go in and fill out a form, she's got to lock up the door and head down to Lower Manhattan to go into an office. And that's real money lost. And that's really counterproductive. So a lot of what we're trying to do, and this is sort of following the mayor's lead, he's done a number of these things over the years, is to instill this business customer service mentality throughout the government. And it's organizing around the customer's needs as opposed to around our needs. So Bob described the 80 or so agencies and commissions that are out there. And unfortunately, heretofore, each agency says, all right, I have a very important set of regulations, and they're important. So it is, as he said, we want to be safe when we eat at restaurants. You want to have safe food, and the health department's important. You want to have safe buildings so they don't collapse. You want to have fire protection so that there aren't fires in restaurants or that people aren't trapped in burning buildings. All of these things are important, but it's a lot to expect of an individual business owner that he has to understand each of those agencies and go to each of them individually. So instead of organizing around what do you need from the fire department, what do you need from Consumer Affairs, what do you need from the health department, it's about You're a restaurant. What do you need as a restaurant? Or you're a small retailer. What do you need as a small retailer? Or you are a small medical office. And it's organizing around those needs. So that's really the goal, is taking that mentality that businesses have around serving customers and instilling that in the government. And so that is a frame of mind, but it's also an ease of doing business where as much as possible, these are really the things that, if at all possible, businesses would rather not deal with the government. So this is not, it's sort of a euphemism when we say it's a service, because ultimately, for a lot of businesses, the best thing for them would never see us again. Just being honest. I mean, again, it's important. There's a public policy reason why we have all these regulations to keep people safe. But from the business point of view, they want to comply as easily as possible with as little time as possible. So that's really what the job is about. And as long as you deal with large corporations or many divisions, so a lot of this is internal machinations to make sure that we have organization internally to serve businesses.
Thanks. Russell, you're the real estate guru on the panel. Why don't you, I could ask two questions maybe. One, give us the snapshot of how you see the real estate business in New York generally, kind of what's up, what's down, and what things how you think about it. And then maybe second, you can talk about, you can take it into the storm issues, and what do you think the effect on the real estate business are because of the storm?
Sure. Thank you, Bob. Well, to begin with, to your first point, as we see real estate over the past 10, I'll say go back 10 years, we've seen dramatic improvement in quality of life, things that you mentioned about things that the public sector has accomplished that really makes New York City a more attractive place to live, better place to do business, and that has greatly supported the real estate industry from the standpoint of being quote, business friendly. I mean, New York is, you know, on one hand, it's a very tough place to do business, but from the standpoint of the government, the city has come a long way, Department of Buildings in the past 10 years to streamline regulations. You can go online. There's many permits required in building a building. There's a sidewalk closing, street closing, permit for this, permit for that. I mean, myriad of permits. But now you can go on the Department of Buildings website anytime and see the status of where your project is, what permits, what boxes aren't checked. And in a city with the dense population, there is the need for regulation. There's tremendous focus on safety. And with various, and the industry is learning, and over the years, things have been streamlined, and there's also been, I think the mayor has even called this the carrot and stick approach, where there's been tremendous incentive to develop in areas, creating incentives for building buildings with affordable components in terms of multifamily residential. And there's also the regulation and stick approach that if you don't do what you're supposed to do, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to get penalized. You're going to get. It's a place that if you follow the rules, you can build. You don't deal with a lot of the issues that you deal with outside New York City in suburban areas where you have neighbors complaining about a building being built, and then then the municipality will stop construction, or the neighborhood groups will take over. In New York City, if you do something as of right and it's approved, the city supports you in proceeding with that development. So that gives, as a developer and to our investors, that gives assurance that once we start a project, if we do the right thing, we can finish. To speak about the and just to mention also about the tremendous investment in returning and creating quality of life. What has the city done? Well, they've done many things to return the waterfront to public use and enjoyment. And all throughout New York City, Manhattan, you look at now in Brooklyn, Queens, the investment by the public sector has spurred development in all these areas, helped to create value. We have 10 years experience in Battery Park City in building the first green high-rise buildings in the country, and they would not have been possible without the large public investment. Neighboring, it's not just government, but organizations like the Battery Conservancy that Wari is involved in have really helped create more of a community and place that people want to live, want to work, and enjoy the city.
I think too that a couple of things. It seems to me that that if you look, you're seeing that, for example, there are now places other than Manhattan where you see business districts really becoming strong. Tacumbo lives in Brooklyn, and when you go to Brooklyn and you see what's going on in downtown Brooklyn, that has a nice drumbeat to it. Long Island City isn't quite as advanced, but that's starting to happen. We're optimistic that the establishment of the Cornell Technion campus on Roosevelt Island will be a boon to that area of Western Queens just across the bridge. Geography is that Roosevelt Island is technically part of the borough of Manhattan, but the only place you can get to it by bridge is in Queens. So I think that what we imagine is that Western Queens will develop a field that'll be a type of, has the potential to be a tech area, kind of like Dumbo and those types of things, is something we see down the road. I think the only large commercial area that was affected by the storm was that mostly it was residential, the damage, but there was substantial damage in lower Manhattan, which is kind of grade B office space. Manhattan has, you can correct me, Russell, I think it has about 300 million square feet of office space, commercial office space, and there are about 75 million square feet of commercial office space in lower Manhattan. And probably a third of that is knocked out now, where it got water in the basement and things were closed down. So it's going to take a while for that to kind of get back. But if you think about it, that's 7 or 8%. So it's something we can work through, but it'll take a little while to do. I think Russell talked about green buildings and things like that, which really lets me invite the next commentator to make some observations. And Sergey, I would ask you maybe to take a few minutes to describe Plan YC and what that meant, and which was a mayor's initiative, and he'll describe it. And the second thing is he was the guy kind of all times of night in the last couple of weeks watching gas supplies. He can tell you about what happened to terminals and how they were destroyed. And it was his recommendation which was a good one, that we go to the odd even here in New York too. And so he's had a busy couple of weeks trying to make sure things worked well. Sergey?
Bob, thank you. Well, I think we're in the midst of a tremendous period of innovation in the energy sector, and also a tremendous period of challenge. And New York City is, I think, front and center of many of the national and global issues of the day in energy. Not just coastal protection, which is obviously the issue of the day right now, but also the future of the nuclear sector, the future of the gas sector, energy efficiency financing. I believe New York City is right front and center there, and largely thanks to the leadership of the mayor, who back in 2007 got all the city agencies together to really look at how to improve the quality of life, really, of New Yorkers through the lens of sustainability, and that was really the core of Plan YC. And I think if you look at, there's been a tremendous track record there. If you look at some of the pillars of it, I think really the first piece is green buildings and energy efficiency. I think 80% of our carbon emissions come from the building sector, which is very different than some other cities where the transportation sector comprises the majority of emissions. So the idea that buildings are really a tremendous asset in our sustainability strategy, really understanding how to utilize buildings and information, really creating an information revolution around them, benchmarking buildings, understanding how they consume energy, has been tremendously, I think, beneficial to reducing our environmental footprint. And there's some specific issues. For example, 10,000 buildings in New York City consume number 6 fuel oil, which is heavy fuel oil, in their boilers, and that produces most of the particulate matter emissions in the city. And so if you look at the mayoral way of approaching an issue like that, it's not just regulatory policy, but it's also incentives. And so on one hand, we are looking at phasing out heavy fuel oils from that sector. On the other hand, also providing some financing, some ability to bring lenders into the sector who are more willing to take on risk because of the city's position. And I think we're seeing tremendous progress there that ultimately impacts the quality of life and ultimately asthma rates and public health. So that's one example. I think also if you look at the progress that's been made in New York City in relation to generally air emissions, in 2005, almost 30% of power plants in the city burned number 6 fuel oil as well. And that has largely been phased out, and that has led to tangible air quality benefits in the city. So I think there's been tremendous progress, but there's a long way to go still. And if you look at energy infrastructure, it tends to move slowly. In general, we're talking about infrastructure because of the storm. And if you look at New York City, in many ways, is a marvel of engineering. If you think of what our grandparents and great-grandparents built from what still is, I believe, the longest underground water tunnel in the world, the Delaware Aqueduct, to the utility system. I believe if you put all the copper wire under the ground together, it would be the largest copper mine in the world. But every generation has its responsibility is to be a good caretaker of that infrastructure, but also look at new ways of investing and new ways of doing things. And I think that's really front and center in the challenge today. And I think the mayor has provided tremendous leadership there, and I think we're making a lot of progress.
Good. You want to tell us about how you think the gas crunch that we've had, if we kind of look out, over the next few weeks, how's that going to unfold, and how do we kind of get in this place?
Yeah. Well, the hurricane really part of the challenge is that multiple infrastructures were impacted simultaneously or as a cascade in many ways, and since you had a power outage, for example, in New Jersey, then a pipeline that provides a good percentage of the city's gasoline was out for a number of days, and terminal port infrastructure was also in some cases temporarily damaged. So the delivery of fuels into the city, which is already a challenge because of limited number of roads and trucks and so forth, I think led to a temporary situation where some ability to manage gas demand would give some breathing room to that system. I think that's what we're seeing right now is over the last couple of days, just a little extra breathing room. The system's starting to come back. There's going to be some challenges next couple of weeks possibly as the system really gets back up to speed, but I think we are slowly restoring ourselves, and I think people are getting are calming down a little bit when they're buying patterns, and I think it's much more orderly right now. So we're hoping that the worst is behind us.
Great, thanks. Worry, I think that when the mayor and especially the first deputy mayor talk about assets in New York, and in this kind of first bucket I described of quality of life, parks are always high on the list. Why don't I kind of give you a softball and have you tell us about parks and how we should be thinking about them and what we need to be, so we know what we have. What should we be thinking about for the future? Is that we appreciate what we have today, but how can we make them better, and what are the opportunities for parks?
I think over and over New York has seen parks as economic engines. When we never get a good response to an RFP for an economic idea, let's say it was Battery Park City. What did they invest in? All their public spaces. Why did Russell choose there? You just said, because of the infrastructure of their public spaces. They got the best designers, the best sculpture. They made a beautiful landscape. Governor's Island, again, no grand plan, so what are they investing in? What makes this a sought-after place? If you didn't have the imagination, what can we create to start getting you the imagination for the economic development? So that's all these mini engines that continue. The Brooklyn waterfronts, our own Manhattan, Queens. The people, after you're on the waterfront, I was just with Catherine Hughes, the community board chair, at a meeting before I came here, and she said not one resident is leaving downtown after the flood. They love it. I mean, it's your home. And I think that's so typical. New Yorkers, where do you live? Oh, I live here. Oh, you're 5 blocks away. You're not in my neighborhood. I mean, we are so neighborhood centric. And their parks that's my park. You know, like I try to get everyone to feel that the Battery is the city's birthplace. It's everybody's park. Well, you know, I have to get on my bike. I'm going to go here and I can walk there. So the mayor's initiative is he wants a park 10 minutes from your home. We should, first of all, he recognizes as virtual as we are becoming, we still need the physicality of beauty. We just are never going to be able to duplicate that virtually. So the sense that the environment, the way we beautify, the smartness, we haven't been needed to be drought-resistant plants, but we're planning in the future to have drought-resistant planting material. Same with tree care, the canopy, the shade. It's a lot cooler under shade than in complete sunlight. So there are a lot of things we're doing and getting very smart. The biggest thing for the city's really looking at is how are we going to maintain this asset? We're great at building. We're great at getting great designs. Now what? Well, I believe all these years, and they asked me, Rory, how are you going to function after Bloomberg? What are you going to do? How are you going to do this? And I'm going, well, you know, I feel the infrastructure and what the citizens have come to expect is going to be such a strong incentive for every other public official. And let's also remember, our organization is totally funded by private individuals. Everything we do is privately given. The capital dollars, we've raised 40 in private that stimulated 80 in public. That leveraging is great. But it's been these great private-public partnerships that we've seen throughout, whether it's bids, whether it's conservancies, whatever the model. New York is unique, but I think other cities are adapted. But the United States is very unique. People from all over the world come, and this whole partnership thing is very unique to this country. So,
well, you know, too, I think Rory and Russell should be congratulated, too, that on September 11th, Lower Manhattan had about 25,000 residents. And if you'd kind of done a survey on September 12th and said, what's it going to look like a decade later, you would have been pretty trepidatious, I think. And the reality is today is that this area where his buildings are and her park is has doubled since September 11th.
Triple.
And basically, what you've got is, I go to a very exclusive place for breakfast sometimes called the Gee Whiz Diner, and you look out and you see it's basically stroller derby, where you look out and there is, you have, of course, the kids going to Stuyvesant, but all the other schools, daycare, Barnes & Noble, Soul Cycle, Whole Foods, and it really feels like a neighborhood. And then you have about 6 or 8 million new square feet of office space going up at the World Trade Center site, and Memorial that will have over 1 million visitors in its first year. And so it really is amazing to see in just a decade what can happen to bring this area to life. And it's happening all over the city to see, but you two are really part of something pretty neat. Tacumbo, I was thinking lots of things, but I think maybe what you could do is, I think you've been a Brooklynite since you came, and why don't you talk a little bit about kind of the revisioning of Brooklyn and what's happened both downtown and down to the water and things like that?
Yeah, I think it all starts with what you described earlier, which is the public safety. And I think that transformation, which began 20 years ago, but the mayor has really continued. So I think people didn't really believe that the crime would be pushed down further after Giuliani, but actually it's basically halved again since then. So it's pretty remarkable. And so there are entire neighborhoods which are being populated. Again, the stroller derby you describe, I think, is happening in lots of different parts of Brooklyn. It's just broadened the whole area that people feel comfortable and safe by choice moving to these neighborhoods. And I think there's been, and this goes to the public-private partnerships, a lot of these have been based upon, like downtown Brooklyn, where there's a series of bids, business improvement districts, which are basically local property owners deciding to tax themselves. They assess themselves a little bit extra, pay a few cents on the dollar to pay for additional services. So it's collected by the government, but basically spent by these private entities. And they provide, essentially, the two big things are clean and safe. So they do additional trash pickup and so on. And this, for example, Madison Square Park right here has one as well. They're all around the city. And the remarkable thing is that under the mayor, he has more or less doubled the number of bids, and the vast majority of the new ones have been outside of Manhattan. So in Brooklyn, where I live, in the Bronx, in Queens, Staten Island, these business improvement districts or bids have been added, and they really help to revitalize these retail strips. And that's ultimately when we think about, again, the local neighborhood aspect, where people, my neighborhood, same thing. I live in a neighborhood where it's 10 blocks across. But what people love about the neighborhood are those retail strips. That's what makes New York unique, is that you can go to a big mall anywhere, but it's these strips, these bids, that have your local coffee shop or bookstore or bodega or what have you, where you go kind of do about your local errands. It's more European in some ways than much of the United States. Those have been a catalyst to locus for activity in Brooklyn. So that's happened in downtown Brooklyn, in Dumbo, in Williamsburg, have been real a combination of rezoning and private investment by developers who've built new buildings and brought new residents, and then these business improvements districts have really transformed the landscape. So there's a change in physical infrastructure, and then there's a change in kind of the investment by private businesses, and that's really changed the quality of life.
The neat thing about the bids is the businesses decide how it's spent. So it's their money, but as opposed to giving to the government, and the government deciding how it's spent. So we all own a business, let's say on Myrtle Avenue, and then we decide we'll have a Myrtle Avenue bid, and then we all chip in a little bit of money, but then we hire someone to run our bid, and we tell them we'd like this done, we'd like that done. So it really is much more responsive, I think, to the needs, which is a good, as Tacumbo said, public-private partnership. Russell, let me ask you one more, and then we'll start with questions so people can get prepared. So when I look at real estate, I think that 4 or 5 things seem to me to be really kind of hitting on all cylinders. I think that the residential real estate business has a good momentum. I think that that the whole retail has pretty good momentum. The one that I'm less sure of is commercial. It seems like, the trifecta of high land prices, high construction cost, and high taxes, it's pretty challenging. Help us decipher that. If you build a AAA building, it's got a rent for $100 a square foot. Help us think through how that should solve itself. And I could be wrong, so if I
well, no, I think that's accurate. I think the commercial sector is not back to pre-Lehman, where residential and retail is very strong, and I think is and getting stronger. I think the unemployment now in New York City, I think, is around 9 or 10%. I think the financial sector has lagged in recovery. I think that has kept demand down. But I think long term, and a lot depends on location, but I think long term, there's really not a lot of supply being built. There are some large projects, Hudson Yards and related, signing up Coach last year. I mean, I think it's starting. We're seeing more of it happening, and I think it's a function of time. I think much different from prior years, where there was tremendous supply. After 9/11, I think we lost over 20 million square feet, and maybe 25, considering World Trade Center plus residential conversions. There was a time downtown, old office buildings went through a period of conversions to residential. So I think given the restricted supply and high barrier to entry, I think we're seeing it picking up. And we have a property on the High Line now that's commercial property that we're seeking a major tenant. And one of the bright spots is that all the tech companies have strong interest in New York City. Google and the Chelsea area, tremendous demand in companies wanting to be in New York, and not they want to be here where the marketing firms are, not just in Silicon Valley.
Well, it's interesting. I do think that most of the time developers come and tell me the single biggest problem is taxes, so it's my fault. But I do think that there are other issues. Building costs are really high here. And you said it earlier in your comments about we want to build safely and we want to have first-class construction, but the price is pretty high here. And so I think we're bumping into a price issue. And you see conversions now where also the other change is that the open plan office is really something people are excited about. It's not a negative that you have to live with. It's actually what lots of companies want, and businesses you didn't think would have a open plan office today are saying, gee, I think we'd like to try that, which reduces the amount of real estate per person pretty dramatically, so you're contracting the potential demand. I think, too, you mentioned something that ties into what Lori said. You know, she mentioned public-private partnerships, and I think one that Tacumbo and I have worked on over the years is the High Line. So the High Line is about $120 million of public money, about $60 or $70 million of private money. But you look at this, and so you think about the return on the investment, that they've been, since the High Line was started, bless you, they've been about 30 new buildings built along the High Line. So that are, as 22 or 23 are built, 3 or 4 coming out of the ground, and 2 or 3 are still on the drawing boards. But imagine what that's done. So the $120 million that the city put in, think of all the tax revenues that have come off the buildings and what it's done to kind of change a neighborhood and create everything exciting there. And the real icing on the cake was when Google took over the Port Authority building and really kind of brought the tech drumbeat right into the city. So why don't we kind of go to questions, if that's okay, and we've got one here. Let's have the easy ones first. So we're running out of time. Good, that's great.
Thanks. My name's Greg. My interest is in energy efficiency, and you've mentioned it quite a bit, and the trend towards sustainability and whatnot. And I would like, I guess, one of you maybe to speak on the next few years after this landmark benchmarking study, especially with the 50,000 square foot buildings measuring their electrical and natural gas utilization. I guess with reference to carrot and stick type approach, I believe that the carrot would be the return on retail rates and pricing for either selling or renting commercial or residential space. That's probably going to be delayed, and I think more of the trend is going to have to be forced through the stick approach, which is mandating maybe the lower quartile of the poor performing buildings to continue to get up towards sort of the mid-range. Would you agree with that it's more of the stick for the next 3 to 5 years until pricing becomes the carrot?
I'll hand over the hard part to you, Tacumbo, but I think there's a tremendous value proposition in the sector for energy efficiency. I think there is low-hanging fruit. I think you will see investments that are going to take place, not necessarily because they're mandated. So I think you're going to see a significant amount. You're seeing them already. And also, there are other creative solutions. For example, the city has an entity, it's called New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation, which is developing essentially not only disseminating information about the sector, but also providing financing tools to in areas particularly where it's difficult for building owners to get financed. So I think I don't see it as a pure regulatory matter right now. I think there are still information barriers that we need to overcome, and I think there's still a tremendous amount of value in a large segment of the building stock.
I would just add, I mean, I think to your point about that maybe the market, the carrot isn't there for leasing. I think, I mean, you've seen this in your buildings that sort of green attributes are, in a competitive market, it's an advantage. And so precisely when there's sort of excess supply is when that becomes an advantage. Because if it's a tight supply, then everything gets taken regardless. It's when there's excess supply that people can be choosy, and one of the things they're using to differentiate is how green is it, how energy efficient it is. And I think absent the information, as Sergey said, there's this information, lack of information, people can't use that as differentiator. But if the information is there, then consumers will be able to make decisions based upon that, which may or may not be sufficient, but I think since we don't have the information yet, I think there's significant progress will be made once that information is available.
Question, he has a microphone all the way up front, first row.
In the past couple of years, I've traveled I've been to Shanghai, Hong Kong, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and seen the high-rise cities. I mean, the construction crane certainly has been the symbol of modern China. So I was intrigued at some ideas floated about rezoning the Grand Central area with, in essence, a sense that unless New York becomes a city of 100-plus story buildings, we will not be the vibrant world center that we aspire to be. So I wondered if you could comment on that.
Sure. I'll start on this because I guess I've been identified with this project. Then I'll let Russell comment on whether he thinks our thesis is correct or not. And so we can have a he said, she said right here. I think that the view is 3 or 4 things roll into this idea. Number one is that that modern offices have characteristics of columnless free space and high floor ceiling heights and things like that. And the average building in the central business district on the Upper East Side is 74 years old. And if we compare that and we look how little building has been done in the last 10 years, that I believe there are 2 buildings in this 60 square block area we're looking at that have been built in the last 10 years. If you looked in Chicago, Paris, London, Los Angeles, and London, Los Angeles, then those places, Chicago, they had substantially more buildings. So we haven't been refreshing our stock of commercial space. It's my view that we need to think about incentives because, ironically, because of the zoning laws, which are quite old, in some of the areas around Grand Central, the zoning has changed, and if you took down the building that was there, you couldn't build back as big as it is today. So who's going to do that? Nobody. So we have to think about the idea of how you could refresh this idea was the beginning of it. We also believe that locating density, commercial density, close to transportation is a good thing too. And so why shouldn't we densify around transportation with the Grand Central as it is, East Side access and things, expanding the capacity, then it makes sense to increase the density, not out of scale, not dissimilar to the Bank America. It would be density not dissimilar to the Bank America building at Bryant Park. That kind of scale and density. It's not way out of whack. And you know, we have now, there's a new normal in New York. The Gehry building down there where I work is 100 stories. The World Trade Center site is going to have buildings of 100 stories. And Hudson Yards will have buildings of that scale. So why shouldn't the central business district have scale of like that? And so I think those issues all roll in together to saying we should look at this. And we have a plan to do a rezoning around Grand Central that allow for more bulk and more scale. But it won't happen right away. This is for the years ahead. It takes 7 years or more to empty a building. If Russell has a building in Grand Central, by the time he gets people out and takes it down, it'll be a decade before he can really get to work building this. So no one needs to look at their watch that this is going to happen. This is years and years out. But the idea is that this is what I meant by the mayor insisting that we think long-term about infrastructure issues. But if we want to be a city that's thinking forwardly, then this is exactly what he would tell us to do along those lines. So you should comment on whether you think we've got it right or not, and you and I haven't practiced, so this could
well,
be...
I think you have my only regret is that we don't own any properties in that district. No, but I think it's a great approach that as the city, as you mentioned, these buildings are very old. How can you create incentive to bring buildings of the future to New York with great architecture, great amenities, and I think to facilitate that, incentives are maybe one of the few choices to do that. And I think in many cases it doesn't necessarily mean the streets becoming like canyons like downtown. I think many times new architecture today actually brings more light and air down to street level. And I think it can, again, can go to improve quality of life. Yes, it gives incentives to developers, but I think that's necessary. It's that public-private interaction that I think is so critical.
This hit me when I was working with a tenant who wanted to consolidate New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey office space, and they wanted a bit more than 1 million square feet. There was not a single place in the central business district along Park Avenue that would fit their standards, not one. So they had the only place they could go would either be wait 3 years for Hudson Yards, go into World Financial Center, or wait 1.5 years and go in World Trade Center. That was it. There was nothing. And we all think of Park Avenue as kind of the business. This should be where Fortune 50 companies should be. And that's where they have been. And they couldn't scratch their itch for what they needed. and we've got to solve this. It was kind of my take. Tacumbo?
There's one thing I was going to clarify. When you say incentives, it's not actually handing people cash. It's just allowing, as you described, people to build a building of sufficient size where they can make money. So this is the way that there's no tax dollars being spent here. It's just allowing them to build a size which is economic.
And we've also talked about having them make improvements because this will increase the number of people. So whether it's increased access to Grand Central, underground, out of their lobbies, things like this. And Amanda Burden has had an idea too that we're just working on early stages of the idea of closing off Vanderbilt and making it a plaza. And she's done some early work about has the look and feel of Rockefeller Center type Channel Gardens up Vanderbilt. If you know, it's a 4 or 5 block street that basically is for taxis and black cars, and it's not anything special. But when you think lots of train stations in Europe are with large plazas around them, and so isn't this something that might be attractive that you could do? So that's kind of the things we've been thinking about. Thank you. But there'll be cacophony. This is, right in the center of, what you're going to do. Yes, ma'am.
My question's about the waterfront. You said there's been a focus on developing it. With the impact of the storm, and apparently we're going to get these more frequently, has there been any rethinking of that? Or
Sure. So the last few weeks have been focused on trying to deal with the challenges that were created by this. But the last meeting I had at work today was with 4 or 5 of us talking about now by the end of this week we want to be able to raise our hand and tell you a plan for evaluating how we did with regard to dealing with the storm, what we've learned about our current requirements, infrastructures, and standards, and look way down the road as to how they should be adjusted or not. Sergey and Tacumbo could talk about Plan YC, which was an effort to think about that in a forward way 7 or 8 years ago and then refreshed. But we're going to look at it again. But we spent now about 45 minutes thinking about that in the last 3 weeks. But knowing this mayor, that he says, I come with opinions, everyone else comes with data. And so we'll have to be able to show him, and we'll get organized to report out to people as to what we've learned and what we've seen. I think, though, that I wouldn't want anyone to think, and I think Russell would back me up, but I'll let him say it, this does not mean that we should abandon the idea of developing on the waterfront. It means that we should learn and develop smart and build buildings in the right way. We should put generators up in the building, not in the basement. You should do lots of other things, and you should plan for water to come in and then recede. And so there are ways to do this smarter, but the idea that we're going to leave the waterfront is not right. I can predict that, although we're going to learn what we do. When people first came to New York, they arrived at the tip of Manhattan, as Rory reminded you, and then as you became more prosperous, then you moved north and inland. And that was the way that the city developed. And when you see these maps that show over time, that's what happened. But today, you're seeing people wanting to live, work, play, and commerce all at the waterfront. And we need to accommodate all of those different attributes in terms of how we think about it. But I think we'll be reporting back to people on what we've learned, what mistakes we made, both in the operational side of dealing with the storm and of our building codes and standards. Is that okay? Is that the right answer?
Sure. Well, I think even in the past 10 years, being involved in green development, I've been looking at the maps, the 2050 maps showing part of Lower Manhattan underwater. But I think good practice in our 3 buildings in Battery Park City were all designed with the mechanical systems up on the roof level and no boilers in the basement. Even in design and electric rooms above the flood level. So I think good practice has led to more preparedness. Did we ever anticipate the flood? No, but we designed the building. We're in groundwater, so we anticipated water coming up from the ground, not coming from the river. But that led us to think about being prepared for water. And I think most of the buildings that were affected were really older buildings that were not designed to today's standards.
Yeah, I was in the Rockaways today at a newer development, and it looked pretty good. It wasn't old construction. When you go through the southern part of Staten Island, these are bungalows without strong foundations that didn't build to a high standard, and they're the ones that have had the most impact.
But Bob, we have to commend Russell. He's very
humble. 2 of his buildings are gold, and the other one is platinum LEEDs. We know how to build, but we need to encourage more of the, and I hope Russell's story gets out there big time, how the garages did not, they're in the basement, they didn't flood. And the electricity is another function of how the grid works in Manhattan. But it's also saying we do know, the architects know, the engineers know, the technology is there. We just have to ensure that people build to that level. And you don't get a lot. It's the only platinum LEEDs building in the city. Now that shouldn't be that way.
Good. Maybe we should just take a couple more questions because we're about to get the hook here. We'll take one here and then one over here. How's that?
No,
And if you just stand up and yell it, I'll repeat it if you don't have a mic.
Hi, my name is Andrea DiDeMarco, and I'm wondering if the city has any plans to pursue P3 projects, which are private-public partnerships, and how that would impact, I guess, the infrastructure in the future.
So, Tacumbo, do you want to take that about P3 and then maybe go ahead?
Sure. I mean, I think fortunately, the mayor has been a really good steward fiscally of the city, so there's not a need to have a fire sale. So you may have heard in other places where Chicago and other places sold out soft assets essentially to raise money because they had an immediate need. So we don't need to do that here. But I think the point you raise is a good one, that we're thinking creatively about the future of infrastructure. We're going to think about how do we bring the skills and the discipline of the private sector to benefit the public for public investments. So there are things that we're considering, for example, for some of the parking, for example, where we wouldn't necessarily sell the asset, but we'd have private management. So again, this is something we've heard from Maury and others. Public-private partnerships have been a big way in which the mayor has governed, and thinking about additional ways in which to do that. And the parking is one example that we're considering right now, but I think you want to sort of figure this out in ways that are long-term fiscally prudent. So it's not about raising cash, but bringing private sector management skills and discipline to bear.
I think 2 examples that are kind of, you might not think of them as public-private partnerships, but I would suggest they are. I think the whole applied sciences, where we put up $100 million, and then Cornell and the Technion are going to basically transform 12 acres, and they'll spend several $billion off of our $100 million. And so I think that's one. And the other example I gave was the High Line, where basically that was us starting the flywheel with some initial capital, and then it basically grew and grew and grew and pulled in private capital. Good. Maybe one over here if we have one. Nope, you lose, and we'll go one right here. Okay, yes.
So when you mentioned the applied sciences and engineering future and the graduate level programs, do you see changes in the K-12 education system, just the name of the panel's Future of New York? And do you see those changes affecting content and structure of the current system? Maybe other things changing?
Sure. So pedagogical changes in the whole, New York has 1,200,000 public school students K through 12 and has about 85,000 teachers, if my memory is correct. So this is really turning around an ocean liner. What we've tried to do is create a couple of examples, and we're starting something called the Academy for Software Engineering, called AFSE, which was funded by some venture capitalists. A fellow named Fred Wilson put up the original money, and the idea is 9 through 12 with a focus on software engineering, that these are the skills. And if you go back in the 1940s, there were 2 new airports in New York, and all over Queens were aviation high schools, where they basically taught you the skills, logistics, repair work, mechanical things that would be part of this aviation industry. Well, if you use the same mindset, software engineering is the same skill of the future, same idea, analogy. And so the idea of having high schools that focus on software engineering. You learn coding, but also the delivery of the product, delivery of all of the academic product is through a more technology-enabled way. So we're going to have 4 or 5 of these schools, and we hope that then they'll also serve as examples for other teachers in other places. So that'd be the best example. One other quick one, and we're late on time, is that IBM has sponsored a 6-year high school so that you basically go for 2 more years and you get an associate's degree, and it's focused on software engineering, and IBM guarantees everyone a job interview to work with IBM so that people will basically be about 19 or 20 years old, and you'll work through that. On the Academy for Software Engineering, we're in our first year, so we have 9th grade only. We had 750 applications for 150 slots. This was not a competitive school like Stuyvesant or Bronx Science, so it's open to anyone, but I think it was self-selecting. People know this is a steep hill. Don't sign up for this if you want to coast. That sign up for this, and people were bringing their kids, dragging them to say, can we get part of this, because they know this is what the future is. We're going to get the hook, so let me just say thanks. What a great group. Let's give them a And before we finish, I think this is really fun for all of us. You can see we're kind of all in on the idea, but I'd leave you with 2 messages, I think. And one is that any way you slice it, and there's a lot of really interesting work about this, cities are really where the future is. If you look at more and more the productivity is coming from cities, they're environmentally much more efficient than non-cities. They also are more economically efficient. And the great news, if you believe in cities on the way up, the good news is New York is doing great too. It's simple. People want to live here. The population's growing. People want to visit here. Last year, 50 million visitors came to New York. It's the #1 tourist destination by far. Schools, we have 650,000 post-secondary students in New York City. People talk about college towns. We have more college students in New York than Boston has people. So the idea that we're not the college town is crazy. And so any way you look at it, live, work, study, visit, then basically New York is on an upswing. And so thanks a lot for listening.
Tremendous panel. Thank you so much, and hopefully you all will be around for a little bit to answer some questions. Before we wrap up this evening, I want to thank Bill Vermont for our wonderful venue here tonight. And I want to recognize Bill and Linda Martin and Beth Higgins as the leaders of our regional group. So if they could stand, and I'll turn it over to Bill.
So I'm Bill Vermont. I was trained in '97. I work here at Credit Suisse. So happy to host you here. I've been cooking all day, so the reception is hopefully will be lovely. But again, I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge Linda Martin and Beth Higgins, who are the 3 of us are co-regional chairs for Duke, New York. And the whole concept behind Duke, New York, and evenings like tonight is to kind of bring the vibrant environment, exchange of ideas that we all remember as students at Duke, or if you're friends of Duke, heard about it. To try to bring it to New York and give it a New York flavor, and I think we definitely did that tonight. So thank you again to our panel. Thank you all for coming. If you have ideas for other types of programs you'd like to see, please grab Linda, Beth, or I at the end of the evening, and then the reception's is right around the corner. And you can't go without saying congratulations to the Blue Devils for beating Kentucky.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.